This conversation is brought to you ad-free thanks to the generous support of the Howl in the Wilderness Patreon community. To gain access to early release of all episodes, the full podcast archives, and other extras, visit patreon.com/Howl in the Wilderness. Vlado Šolc, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yes, I've been excited to speak with you about your book, which I believe came out in 2017, Dark Religion, Fundamentalism from the Perspective of Jungian Psychology, which I think, you wrote it in 2017. It's maybe become even more relevant or important to have a depth psychological understanding of fundamentalism. I think both religious fundamentalism, but also ideological fundamentalism. So I'm very happy to have you on the podcast.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. So yeah, when we wrote this book with George, I think it was published in 2018, but we thought about it. It took us a few years to write that. I think since then we have expanded the term dark religion into not just the religious fundamentalism, but essentially to all kinds of isms that have this ideological core, all kinds of possessions of minds that are under the umbrella of manipulation, distorted kind of fantastic thinking. So you can think of conspiracy theories, you can think of cult, you can think of communism, or you can think of a family manipulation of the person within the family, or all kinds of structures. So that would be all under umbrella of dark religion.
Yeah, I thought before we get into some of those subjects, what dark religion is, how it manifests, and what we can do about it, it might be helpful for the listeners if we lay some groundwork with some of the important Jungian concepts that you draw on. And I think the first, most people are going to be familiar with the idea of the unconscious and of unconscious projection, that kind of thing. But I think a concept that many people struggle with is Jung's concept of the self, capital S. So I wonder if you could help the layperson get a handle on this concept.
So it is indeed a very complex concept, and Jung himself, that he kind of worked on through his whole life, basically, on this concept of the self. So there are many angles how we can think about it. Jung talk of self as organizing principle of the psyche itself. So you can think of it like everything that exists somehow is reflected in our consciousness in a very complex but also intelligible and understandable manner, right? Right now we're talking to each other. I see you as a person who's got two eyes, nose, head, right? Like I know about you, I can imagine you're a human being, and I, know your name, etc. So there is something synthesizing that is giving me the sense and meaning of this experience. So if you imagine if I did not have this organizing principle, there would be just another chaos, right? Like in movie Matrix, when Neo looks at those numbers that are kind of falling, he makes sense of them because he can read that. But if you cannot read that, then you are in a realm of chaos, and it's not intelligible, non-existing, essentially. It's just a pure mess, right? So the self comes in, and self gives meaning, and it synthesizes it and puts it in some kind of coherent experience. So when you look at a circle, it's circly, and if you look at a square, it's a square. So that is one aspect of the self. Another aspect that...
Can I just pause there for a second? Yeah. So would you say that one of the ways that the self organizes our experience or reality is in the form of archetypes? Like you recognize me as a person because I generally conform to the archetype of a human and maybe a human man.
Yes, you can say that.
Hmm.
Yeah, like the self could be sort of the conglomerate of archetypes, if you think it that way, right? Like the different archetypes are different aspects of the self.
Hmm.
Because as Jung would say, self is everything. Like it's that is conscious, but it's also that it is unconscious. So
But
if I
it,
recognize your wall in your room as green, that is because something unconsciously allows me to filter that and see it as green. And now we can extrapolate and can think of words as love, hate, happiness, right? Like anything that we have an experience of and can assign meaning to it.
mhm. And the self isn't just contained within us as an organizing principle of each individual's psyche, but he's talking the big picture. It's the organizing principle of the cosmos.
Yeah, I mean, you can think of it this way that actually we are in the self or we are of the self. In a way, Jung thought about it as was sort of a reality itself, right? So on one hand, there is a matter, on another is the energy. On one hand, there is the psyche, and on another hand is the physas, something physiological. So the self unites those aspects in reality within itself, and it is here before us, right? As Jung would say, it's a priori, and we are sort of born into it. And as we born, we are emerging like this iceberg is emerging from the ocean, and we become to be self-aware and eventually integrate, hopefully, some aspects of the self and become aware of those aspects that were prior to it unconscious and we become more conscious of it. That means we'll withdraw those projections and become self-aware, and then it comes to this understanding that it's paradoxical and it has different aspects of it that are beyond good and evil, that are amoral or there are no morality attached to them. And we in our human consciousness have to reconcile them and make some kind of sense out of those, just being in the middle of them as the observing and experiencing ego, as you would say, right? This center of the consciousness,
Hmm.
while the self would be the center of the conscious and unconsciousness.
Hmm. This is one of the things that I find curious about Jung is that he chose this word or term, the self, which he borrowed from Hinduism. And instead of using a term from the Western tradition like anima mundi, the soul of the world, why do you
Mhm.
think that is? I mean, because he really did think that because our psychology is rooted in a Western tradition, that we should look to Western traditions such as alchemy to understand ourselves. But then there's this term, the self, which is kind of an anomaly in that it's borrowed from another culture.
Mhm. Yeah, it's the Atman. I really don't know. That's a good question, maybe for Sonu Shamdasani, who like really study how Jung arrive at certain terms. I I really don't know. I remember reading about it a while ago, but I actually forgot how Jung get to it. But he was definitely eclectic, and he compiled different ideas from what was happening around the world and the science and the religion.
Hmm.
And I know he had his experience once he was, I don't know how old he was. He write about it in Memories, Dreams, and Reflections when he is on a rock and he says, "Am I actually emanating, or am I consciously creating this rock, or is this rock thinking me? Is this rock giving existence to me?" Right? So that was very transcendent. That was sort of beyond this duality, which was, this Cartesian Western paradigm of looking at the reality in this sort of a dual ways. It's like this versus that, rather that this belongs and this is part of everything, which was kind of a Christian mysticism, right? Would go there, Meister Eckhart. It would even many alchemists, they went beyond those dualities. And part of maybe what fascinated Jung was his own personal experiences that he had as a child.
Mhm. Right. Yeah. It's very much like the alchemical idea of as above, so below. The individual as a microcosm of the macrocosm. And yeah, it sounds like he had a kind of a yogic revelation that dissolving of the individual ego and that kind of ambiguity of, am I creating the world or is the world creating me?
That's exactly right. So he had what I would call a mystical experiences as a child, and then of course that continued when after he broke up with Freud, that he had even more mystical experiences that he tried to make sense via read book, and that lasted for 11 or 12 years. So one can only imagine that Jung had very deep experiences, and with his bright mind and with his educated mind, he was able to create a beautiful theory that really approximated all these, maybe the Eastern teachings and the Western mysticism, into a theory that actually makes a lot of sense. But we would not be able to get it without this very, what Jung would call, what I can't think of this word right now. That you're going to edit this, right? You're going to cut some parts of it.
I don't usually edit, but I can.
Okay.
I think it just makes us human that
Empirical.
we,
That's what I was trying to get at. That he was empiricist, right?
yeah,
He dwelled on it because he wanted to be a scientist. He wanted to be accepted by the community and so on. But he used a lot of empirical ways of thinking about unconscious. He says even the unconscious is somehow empirical experienced in us. We are observing it. We have dreams, visions, etc. But it's empirical. And it wasn't just through philosophy and sitting and meditating and saying Tao is this or that, right? But he said, actually, it is a living experience of mine that I'm trying to approximate to you.
yeah, right. And even his theory of the archetypes comes out of that study of comparative religion and mythology, and just noticing these patterns that reoccur at different times and places. And the theory develops out of that empirical research. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So another term that people may have some trouble with that's related to the self is the imago Dei, the God image.
Mhm. Mhm.
Now, can you speak a little bit about that and help people grasp this?
So the God image, as understood in Jungian theory, is actually that which we make of God. And the God image can be represented in a way of what we consciously know, want to believe, and conceptualize of God. So it is the image we make of it, right? Like this is the picture that our mind makes of God, and oftentimes, which is the big fallacy or the mistake, calls it a God and says, "Oh, I know what God is because I have this God image that perfectly fits the God that really is out there," right? So the God image is just our limited human concept of God. And that can be conscious, but it also is unconscious because that God image is represented in the unconscious as well, right? I mean, Jung refers to many dreams or visions, etc. That are like the historical archetypal representations of God as a mandala or as a wind, or it could be that cannot be named, and that is also experienced in dreams, etc. So we do have also unconscious experience of the God image, and then consciously put that image into words, ideology, art, and so on. But
Hmm.
it's, of course, just the limited distillate of. the
So
God.
one of the things that I think people need to understand is when we use the word image, we're not just talking about a visual pictorial image, but we're looking at this conglomeration of ideas, concepts, and maybe also pictorial images as well. Yahweh is the old man with the beard and the robe up in the clouds.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
And that can be, the
Oh,
are you there?
Vlado, yeah, you just froze up there. So you can just pick that up from the beginning of your
Yeah,
response.
my Wi-Fi says my Wi-Fi disconnected for a minute here. I'm not sure why. Um, I'm glad we are back. So I was just saying, like it's a representation in a way, like the God image. It's what all the senses allows us to represent it. If it's in terms of feeling, in terms of ideology or theology, in terms of picture, or in terms of anything that one throws there at this idea and try to create the God.
Hmm. So for the Christian, let's say the Imago Dei would be something like God is all knowing, all seeing, all powerful, all good, and takes the form of Jesus as the incarnation of this all powerful, all knowing God.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And some people would go to the extent it's a man, or it's a trinity, but call him him, and it's white. It's not only Jesus, but it's white, right?
Right.
And has long hair, or and is historical, etc. Right? Like people do name their own imago Dei in many different ways, and that's sort of the main criticism of this fallacy in our book Dark Religion, because that's exactly what we call dark religion. If we start to hide behind the God, if we start to appropriate God to ourselves, if we start to say we know actually what God is, what it means, how it works, then we are taking something away from the mystery and making it at the disposal of our ego. And our egos are now creating the God. And we are thinking, fantasizing, and believing we are acting in the name of God, but we are actually unconsciously acting in the name of God. But it's the ego that is behind that. So we are
Right.
acting out of selfishness and all the secret and unconscious desires.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think about that idea that justified the colonization of America, the manifest destiny. It's God intends for us to expand our empire and to Christianize the New World. That would be this kind of dark religion at work in a way, like using God to justify what I want for myself or my country.
Yes, yeah, that's so true. And it's been done in the name of God, so many atrocities. It's essentially, when we think of it from the universe perspective, God has a lot of energy. The self has a lot of energy, right? Because it's unconscious, it can swallow all the projections. But then that energy could be stolen from it and used into manipulation, making people feel bad, shaming them, guilting them, manipulating them, saying, if you don't do that, God will punish you. If you don't follow this teaching, then you'll burn in hell, etc. So it binds with a lot of different emotions that could be used in this very controlling and a narcissistic way that fundamentalist religions, churches, etc., use to coerce people into doing what it actually serves their egos rather
Mhm.
than the greater spiritual principle of the universe.
And so the idea is that because everyone has an imago Dei, a God image within them, it contains a lot of power. And so people can manipulate through fear because people inside feel that power. And if someone says, God is against you or what you believe or what you do, that fear is going to be like a very kind of primordial fear because of
Yeah,
the
that's exactly
power,
right.
right? The power that the Imago Dei contains. And likewise, reverence, worship on the kind of other end of the spectrum is going to be just as powerful because it's touching into that Imago Dei, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's that, I mean, from the Jungian sort of hierarchy perspective, that's the highest archetype that is sort of encompassing all the other archetypes. So, and there is also this religious instinct that is bound to it. We all have this compelling question: what is our meaning of life? Where are we going with this? And why we are here, etc. Some things that could not be ever answered by scientific means because they remain mystery. But whoever decides to manipulate that mystery, they can do a lot of damage with it as well. In a
Mm.
similar way, right? I mean, we had some original attachment to our parents, or there was a disruption of this attachment that manipulated person can really exploit later on in our relationships because we have this yearning, we had the tendency and need to be loved and to love, etc. But if there was some kind of disruption of it or distortion of it, that it's really easy to take advantage of because part of that is split in unconscious and is just projected out onto the leader, guru, partner, etc. Whoever
Right.
feels that needs to do that.
Yeah, so it's kind of the same dynamic, but on a kind of a smaller, more personal level. Like I could present myself as a kind of loving father figure to you, and if you have like a father wound, it's going to kind of excite that father archetype in you or constellate the complex, and whatever happens in that interface between the two, whether it's a reverence or love or a strong dislike or hatred, it's going to constellate those emotions, right?
Yeah. And now imagine that this person is religious and grew up in a
Mm.
very religious, strict environment and would like to rebel against the highest archetype, which is God, right? Like, I mean, you can rebel against your own father and you can criticize your father and eventually you can get in a fist fight with your father or something like that, right? But when it comes to these religious archetypes, say you are actually arguing against the word of God. You are infidel, you are sinful, you must not do that, right? So the fear that is associated with that is really the deepest existential fear because like who am I, a small human being to judge, to criticize, or uh, to tell God that God is not right, right? Sort of a Jobian task
Hmm.
to happen. A lot of people are deathly scared of it, and that's why who holds that card in their hands holds a lot of power as
Mm.
well.
I'm thinking about Jung and his answer to Job. Uh, he had I don't know, the courage to question God or to psychoanalyze God as being, having an unintegrated shadow aspect that was playing out in in the story of Job. So he was a kind of a spiritual rebel in that
Mhm.
way.
Yeah, kind of a Job himself
Yeah.
in a way.
Hmm.
He was he definitely was criticized by the religious Christian community, Protestant Catholic community, but also by scientists, right? Like the sort of the scientific Cartesian community with the Freudian tradition, right? The scientists of enlightenment. They said, well, you are mystical. What are you suggesting here? You're, bringing a God into psychology. On another hand, the 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 religious people told him, you are imagining God, you're psychoanalyzing, right? Like you're projecting it. You know nothing about God.
Hmm.
What are you daring? to bring your small human mind into this mix. And it's very interesting how I mean, when you read, at least what I read when I read Answer to Job, is it like who or what is he really talking about, right? Is he talking about the Godhead, the God itself, or is he talking the unconscious as a sort of an entity that needed to become conscious through human consciousness?
Right.
And I don't think I actually never, I mean, I'm not there yet to know what Jung meant. And I think he probably used this beautifully artistically, this kind of ambivalent language that is really hard to pinpoint what he's actually referring to. And I think that's beautiful in his writing, that he leaves those gaps that we can actually imagine into it and expand our minds, and not just, it doesn't pins us down to very definite answers.
Yeah, I think it would be wrong to say that he was using that story to only speak about the collective unconscious, and the God of the Old Testament being a projection of that or whatever. I think, yeah, there is that ambivalence or ambiguity in it, because he did have that that spirit in him. Like, I'm reminded of that interview that's, now famous, but the interviewer asks him, "Do you believe in God?" And he gets that twinkle in his eye, and he says, "I don't believe, I know." And so when you said, I mean, this is like a great mistake for us to identify with the Imago Dei and think that we know God. I mean, was Jung guilty of this, or was he being a provocateur, or both?
I don't know, or both. Yeah. I mean, after all, Jung was a human being, right? And he had some doubts, and he, like was open-minded, and he could, think of things from different angle. And I know he was then grossly criticized after this BBC interview, and then he backpedaled a little bit and he tried to put it in perspective. And again, what was he defending against? The critical people, the scientific collective, or was it his own doubt about existence of God? And he never said one way or the other. Many Jungians, they would like to believe that he was definitely a believer, and that's how he answered it. But the way I read Jung, he was open-minded and he tried to be in the middle of those opposites through all his life. And he said the idea of God attracts my mind as similar way the sun attracts the planets, that they revolve around it. But I think Jung himself knew very well that when you put the finger on a God, and if you try to grasp this mystery and make it something definite or final, then you lose the mystery in the same time. So it is also a paradoxical situation. We can know and unknown in the same time, and we can be sure and uncertain in the same time, because what do we really know, right? I mean,
Yeah. And I think, if you're involved in spiritual practice, you can vacillate. You can have these moments where you think, I know, I get it. Poof, I have this experience of oneness, or of kind of infinite love. I've had these experiences, and you go, oh my God, and then it fades, or the doubt creeps in, and the mystery returns, and you continue to kind of wrestle with this idea of God,
yeah, then you
maybe
start to doubt.
forever.
Yeah. Then you doubt it, but then when you doubt, that makes you human. And that's why you're doubting, and that's why you know that you are in some kind of discerning process. But
Mhm.
at, at the end, you cannot arrive in any final answer, because I think the most important reason for that is because you first would have to define the God in order to know what you're talking about. And when you try to define the God, you just are in this ever expanding, mysterious playing field that you can never actually explain. And Jung would perhaps say it's the ignotus per ignotium, that you can only explain it by more complicated terms. and that you keep expanding forever. And then without definition, if somebody asks you what is God, well, the silence is probably the best answer.
Yeah. I mean, we can see that, if we study, well, any kind of spiritual traditions, I think, like when you really get into it, it does get more and more complex. It's like the philosophers, the theologians are trying desperately to describe something that is infinitely indescribable. And so you see these kind of systems develop, these different hierarchies and levels of being, and different kind of images and metaphors for the one, the all. And it's kind of fascinating because they get to a point where it just gets so complex, you end up throwing up your hands and going, well, who the hell knows,
Yeah, give me a cup of tea. Yeah, I
Yeah, let me
know.
become just like a Taoist, It's or a Heraclitean, where it's like, it's like love and strife, yin and yang, and it's all in this complex balancing, ordering, alive thing that's unfolding all of the time. That's kind of like where I usually end up in frustration. It's like, well, it's
Mm.
complicated.
Yeah, it's a lifelong task, and it's perhaps here for us to have fun with this. I
Mm.
mean, it cannot be exhausted. And and it, well, when Jung thought of those things, he said every philosophy, it's a personal confession of its beholder, right? Like
Yeah.
every philosopher has a certain disposition, certain capacity, etc., certain time, and the philosophy is expression of it. But nevertheless, it's limited, just like everything else. We can see only so much of the light spectrum and hear only so much of the sound spectrum. And that perhaps applies to everything that we experience and can make sense of. There is so many things we cannot figure out mathematically because we don't even know the math that we don't know.
Hmm.
We don't know about dark matter. Supposedly it's a majority of the stuff out there, but I mean, we don't even know how to figure out how to figure it out.
Exactly. Yeah. Whenever I hear someone talk about, just the other day, I heard someone saying, well, we were talking about Neoplatonism, and someone was saying that, well, when the quantum, this aligns with what the quantum physicists are saying, and about the Big Bang and everything coming from the one. And I was thinking, well, that's just another theory. They don't actually know. I mean, it's theory all the way down, after a certain point, outside of history. We can never know, even about the creation of this world, this planet, and
Hmm.
how it all began. It's all theories. And I love this idea that it's a confession of that person's like their personal beliefs or biases. Or I often think when I hear different interpretations of texts or dreams, I think it's actually a confession of that person's desire. Like if I'm telling you about my concept of God, it's kind of in a way secretly telling you what I really wish God is, or
Hmm.
could be.
Hmm.
Yeah. I think if we hold that perspective, it helps us navigate a world where there's so many authorities telling us how it is and what's right and what's wrong. So this is
Hmm.
like a kind of a psychological attitude or perspective, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I think it comes to this dark religion, that dark religion is it's just an illusion of mind to believe or to get sort of attached to idea that it knows and it has this final answer. And not only it knows, but it also has this moral right to do whatever it wants with other who are outside of it, right? So a lot of
Hmm.
people who say, okay, because that's what God said, translated, that's because what I believe that God said, and that's what it's not part of my belief, it's an unconscious, therefore projected onto you as an evil. I have a right to eliminate you or torture you or, or burn you at the stake or tell you that your sexual orientation is some kind of a sinful choice that you are making, and therefore I have a right to do whatever I, as a holder of this belief, can do. And that's the big fallacy. That's what George and me try to explain based on Jungian's finding that the dark religion is a trap. It's a developmental stage, but unfortunately, it's a powerful phenomena or entity that it has so much power in the world that the world's existence depends on it. Let's look at the war in Iran right now. I mean, there's fundamentalists in the United States trying to impose their own beliefs on the fundamentalists in Iran, helped by fundamentalists from the Jewish religion. So you have these three Abrahamic religions trying to fight over the power and energy and domination of the world. So this is a dark religion par excellence, right? The ego is using that image of God to enforce their own greed and control.
Based on how you've described dark religion, I think there are some people who would think that any religion is a dark religion, that it'd be hard to find examples of people who didn't use religion in this way to justify their own, morals, beliefs, actions.
Well, that's a very good point, and I would like to stress that like it's not like George or me or anyone who is into Jung and trying to understand those things that we believe we know what the right religion is, right? So it's like more saying this is probably not really healthy, right? So it's a spectrum. It's maybe difference between the night and a day, and there is some gray areas, right? When it's just a little bit visible until it's really dark. So it's more like saying some things doesn't sound right. They seem to be very dark, meaning very unconscious. So there are some processes that when applied, people would say, and they sort of use this Occam razor, and they say, it can't be true. I mean, this is like way too much. It's just like when somebody tells you Earth is flat, and I believe that, and I'm not willing to discuss it, and whatever evidence you have to disprove that, then I'm not going to believe that. I'm going to just reject it. So then you are going to say, well, I can talk to this guy. He's so dogmatic, and I'm bringing all this evidence here, and he's rejecting it. So there must be something with the belief itself.
Yeah.
And then you ask, so why does he need to really adhere to such a strong convictions that resist the questioning or the resist even discussing about it so much? There must be some kind of psychological grip.
Well, let's get into some of the questions that you seek to answer in the book. And the first one is explores how do we recognize dark religion? Like, what are its psychological and religious signs? So to differentiate a dark religion from I don't know, a healthy relationship to religion, let's say.
Yeah. So we would call it spirituality. So is it the opposite of dark religion is spirituality. So it's like a healthy and open-minded way of looking at the world. So, I mean, somebody asked me recently, like, how do you know if the conspiracy theory is not true? Maybe it's true, and you thought it was a conspiracy theory all along, just like in recent development of the Epstein case, etc. Right? Like, when what do we really know? Maybe those things were happening. So, I think the healthy position is sort of a analytical position, is to take and say it could be. Let's explore it. Right? Let's look at it. What is the evidence? How can we talk about it? What can we investigate together, right? So I think the position of the mind caught in dark religion is dogmatic. So it already predefines things, and it says, "I know this is true." And you say, "Well, maybe there are some other other ways that look at it, and they already the mind code in dark religion already employs all these defense mechanisms in place that start rejecting things, they're rationalizing, or if you had a discussion with somebody who was caught in it, it's going nowhere because it hits this wall, and then person either accuses you, start using this ad hominem, and like calls you name, gets angry, slams the door, leaves the room, or um, it, start explaining things in a way that don't make sense, or comes to this like fate. It is so because I believe that, and there is no discussion about it. So there's all kinds of psychological maneuvers that are nothing that defenses bind to the ego, versus open-minded, a spiritual attitude saying, I don't know. What can we know? What can we hope for? And what should we do? Right? We can ask this kind of Kantian questions about it and go on exploring it. And hopefully there is that attitude that brings you into some kind of middle ground, that it's more healthy rather than dogmatic.
Hmm.
Because what dark religion is essentially a split. It's a narcissistic split, or we call it, the difference between this sort of a dark area between the ego and the self, and the disruption of this axis, where the soul and the mind are disconnected. So we can say that we are not in touch with the other side, with the feelings. So we become robotic, or we become purely rational without connecting what is rationality, what is this rationality springing from, or what is it connected to. And when we cut that off, that part, of course, is more unconscious, and whatever is unconscious doesn't disappear from the world. It just appears in a different, sneakier way, through identification or through projection.
Mm. And what do you think people are getting from dark religion? I can think about, kind of holding on to dogmatic beliefs and assertions uh, because that kind of radical ambivalence about the nature of the world and morality and all of it is kind of terrifying for the ego, right? Like there's so much uncertainty and anxiety provoked in the not knowing. I think for some people at some level of development that leads them to grasp on to dogmatic ideas because it offers some kind of security and a sense of authority.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. Jung said it himself, is this the most terrifying thing, to completely accept oneself? And to go for what you're saying, right? Like the opposite of ego is non-ego, but it's also a complete disintegration and being in the hand of the living God, which is like it's a very scary thing, right? Because who you are, what is your purpose, what is your meaning, what should you believe, etc. So that is bind to so many protective mechanisms that holds the ego together. And when we are in it, we have this unconscious existential dread that is actually the fear of not being, fear of not having, fear of non-existing, or being completely swallowed by all of that is, and that is so anxiously protected. And I think the dark religion feeds into this as you say, the protective mechanisms that holds this structure together, and saying the structure shouldn't change by any means, because if it changes, then really bad things going to happen. And only those heroes who go this heroic journey, and either by their own choice or by the sort of a twist of the fate, find themselves in these situations that those walls of the ego are broken and the self comes in and changes and expands the consciousness. One wakes up, wow, actually I survived it and it was really painful. And now I learn more and I know more about myself and the world, humanity, etc.
Hmm.
But there is no, as Jung said, there is no consciousness without tears. And that fear underneath, the fear from those dark emotions, from very painful, unbearable affect for many people, especially those who had trauma and who experienced a lot of abuse, maybe even pre-verbal trauma, etc. They are going to hold onto something meaningful that gives them some kind of sense of control and power. The other alternative in the form of image is really unbearable.
Hmm. One of Jung's terms that you explore in the book that I find fascinating, it's another one of these borrowed terms from another culture, and that's the mana personality. Um, can you speak about this? Because it has something to do with that identification with the imago Dei, with the God image, right? And what, because one of the things I think about whenever someone's caught in an ideology of some kind is thinking analytically, like you suggested. And the questions I always ask are, what are they getting from it? Like, what's it doing for them? And like, what's it making them do? Like, trying to understand, like, what
Mm.
they're getting, like a security or a sense of knowing, that kind of thing, or an authority, or justifying, these secret desires they have. And so, like, let's talk about the mana personality, because I think that's really interesting. Like, because it gives someone a kind of a charisma, that identification, right? And it makes them an attractive figure, which is why people become gurus of different
Mhm.
kinds.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a certainly interesting idea. So the mana means energy or the spirit. In a way, we can look at it as a mana is like something that is a lot of power.
Right. And it's like, I believe, like a Polynesian word, right?
Yeah, I'm not really exactly sure, but I don't remember where the mana comes from, if it's Polynesian or Sanskrit. But it essentially means there is like the spirit. There is something can be endowed with that spirit. And when the person is possessed by the spirit, as Jung would say, identified with that, then one acts as higher than actually one is, right? So the ego falls under this spell or this illusion of immense power, and one believes that has that power, then it's really easy to attract all these projections from other people who have this emptiness and want to find this guru to be powerful so they can solve all these problems for them without them needing to go and do this authentic suffering. And we've
Hmm.
seen it in the person of Hitler, for example, right? I mean, he just attracted it, and Jung said, well, it's a scarecrow. He's an empty guy. And look, he's just saying those things because he's possessed, and people are following him and marching to death for this guy. So, and I think we see need a lot in the history, and we've seen it certainly nowadays. The people who got fall into this monopersonality spell, they believe they can do anything. Just like Vladimir Putin, he said, he believes he has no limits in what he wants, and he can achieve it.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, so it causes an egoic inflation because the ego becomes kind of filled up with this sense of power. And I'm interested in the kind of people who are vulnerable to dark religion, but also the mana personality. Like, how can people guard against being seduced by that charisma and power?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Like, what is the remedy, or what is how one stays protected? Jung talks about it, and he talks about that we need to be anchored in God, because this spiritual split or the spiritual dread often leads to all kinds of forms of possessions. He said the communism is one of those, right? Like when you sort of eliminate God, when you pronounce God being bad, then what happens with all this energy that all energy possesses in a sort of a conspicuous and a different form, in the form of material possessions or consumerism, etc. So Jung said, like, spiritual approach to life is actually the antidote to possession, meaning being open-minded, being able to look into unconscious, being able to have a relationship with different aspects of ourselves without rejecting them, without demonizing them, without splitting them off, and working with them in an honest, sort of consciously painful way, having a conscious suffering about our own selves and conscious suffering about what is happening to us, being realistic about that, rather than creating defensive mythologies that accuse somebody else or are so fantastic that do not produce any solutions, only create this isolation of the ego that is caught in this fantasy of the false self. So really working through it in an honest and spiritual way.
I found that a depth psychological or archetypal understanding helps with this, helps maintain this openness and considering all the different possibilities as equally possible, but also valid as well. And I think James Hillman was really good at that. I mean, he was so anti-dogmatic, even about, his kind of own hero and mentor, Jung. And I wonder, like, because there is something that kind of paradoxically can happen, no? That even Jung's ideas, which suggest this kind of open attitude, exploratory attitude, analytic attitude, can itself be turned into like a dogma that may even act as a kind of, I wouldn't say necessarily a dark religion. I don't know how, Jungianism could be used for very malevolent purposes. But certainly I've seen it in personal relationships where people can use some of these ideas to either defend or attack another person. Like, for instance, just saying, "Oh, your reflection of me is a projection," obviously, and it's so like the Jungian idea is used as a kind of shield for the ego. So I mean, like, little self-analysis here as a Jungian. I mean, is this possible? Am I reaching too far to say that even Jung's ideas could itself become a dark religion of sorts? To watch or listen to the full episode, become a free or paid member by visiting patreon.com/Howl in the Wilderness, or by downloading the Patreon app to your mobile device. Paid memberships start at just $5 a month and offer a number of benefits, including early access to all episodes, the full podcast archives, and the satisfaction of knowing that you're supporting an independent creator directly. Thanks.